Hello. In this session together, we are going to be looking at the structure of the spine, of our spines, right? And we'll also be looking at the movement capabilities of the different sections, the different spinal sections. And very importantly, we will be looking at how they unify into the possibility of a very sinuous and continuous core bony structure. Each and every aspect of our spine has a slightly different consciousness qualities and traits that it is expressing. So let's look first at the structures themselves. So we have bone, of course, as we know, and we have different bones for different sections of the spine. Our coccyx, of course, is at the very base, way down in there. Coccyx. Our coccyx is curled forward in the body a bit and also is articulates via a mobile disc with the big bone of our sacrum that forms the back of the pelvis and is embodied in consciousness and movement as the structure of spine rather than the structure of a pelvic basin. So we embody our vertebral column all the way to the coccyx, and from the coccyx all the way up, right? So there's that separation between peripheral body, in this case, the pelvic bones, and the vertebral column. So coming up, we have this beautiful arc here of the sacrum, the bone, the sacral bone, and the sacrum, which cups into the body at its top level, then joins with, of course, via disc, the lumbar spine. And our lumbar spine, as we know, is this beautiful, big, thick part of the column that goes through our mid body, right? And becomes an important part of how we move through our middles, right? And very important support for standing on the earth and all of that. The vertebral lumbar section here then comes up and it joins in with the thoracic section of the spine. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Actually, it's yes, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then we come to the bottom, the 12th of the thoracic, the 12th of the thoracic. There are 12. They come up, they form this beautiful cup here, right in the chest that contains and supports our heart from the back, right? This nice little outward curve, just soft. And then coming up, we have the cervical curve, the curve of the spine and its vertebrae, all the way up to the occiput, right? So we have the C2 up here, and then we have the C1, which rides right up on top of the rest of the spine and articulates with the occiput, the base of the skull. So those are the bones. Now, between each of these bones, we have discs. And each of the discs, as you can see, all the way along the spine, each of the discs provides an amazing amount of subtle movement as well as large movement between these vertebral bodies, the big, thick vertebral bodies. So when we look at that and we realize, okay, those are real freedom in movement, these discs. They're not huge, but each one of them has a way that it can articulate with a bone above. So if this is a bone above, and this is a disc, and then this is a bone below, right? The disc articulates with each one of the bones, the one above and the one below, right? So lots of movement in there. Our discs, of course, are composed of big, strong, cartilaginous rings that actually stack in there. So they're super, super strong, right, between the bones, because we know they get a lot of work in a lifetime, right? So there they are. They're these circular, super supportive structures that have some resilience, right? They have to. They have fluidity, they have resilience. And then right at the center, they have a very soft, gelatinous structure called the nucleus pulposa. And the nucleus pulposa within the rings has its own buoyancy as well. So these structures are creating stability and mobility within the vertebral column. Of course, we know that our spine, our vertebral column, as it is commonly referred to, right? A little bit of a disservice to what this bony structure actually is because of the nature of how beautifully it can move and support. Not many columns. I've never seen a column that supports and moves the way the structure of our bony spines do. Um, all right, so each one of these sections, we could call it the coccyx, the sacrum, the lumbar, the thoracic, and the cervical sections of the spine have their own movement capabilities or movement strengths, right? And that we know. And that we know from how we move in our bodies, and we will explore that together. So we have discs, we have bone, and we have a really profoundly integrating uh, structure that isn't as often referenced in our yoga postures and our movement as the bones themselves and the discs and even, of course, the muscles as well. But the ligaments, there are four ligaments in the spine. There's one in the front here, the front of the bodies. It's called the anterior longitudinal ligament. And then there's another longitudinal ligament which wraps the bony discs from the back, bony bones and discs from the back. So the anterior is in front of the vertebral bodies and the discs. And the posterior longitudinal ligament it's more difficult to show here, but it comes up right in behind the vertebral bodies, right across the discs, continuous from the very, very bottom at the coccyx, all the way up along these vertebrae. Right? And it continues all the way up and to the very top here at the top spinal vertebra, yes. And it comes into the front of the skull, and also the anterior longitudinal ligament comes up the front and into the same place. This is your skull, part of it anyway. And this inside is the foramen magnum, this passageway, and that's the passageway of your central nervous system up and into the brain. So your central nervous system is behind the vertebral bodies, right? Now, these two ligaments that are coming up through the foramen magnum are suspending the vertebral structure. I so hesitate to say column. The vertebral structure, this, especially the bones, are being suspended right up into the front. Do you see where my finger is? The front, in forward of the central nervous system, into the bone of the skull, the occiput, the blue bone, right? So I'm going to show you in the back here how they will come up, these two ligaments, holding these big, thick, heavy parts of our spine right into the front of the occiput. So they contain along the front of these bodies and the back of these bodies, all the way up, connected by more ligament up into the front portion of the occipital bone. All right. The quality of ligament is very specific and directional. Whereas muscle in our bodies, it's a little more like, okay, we got this contracting thing to do here. That's muscle. Ligament is very slidey and longer. Not necessarily longer in length, of course, but slidey and directional. So this particular set of ligaments, the anterior longitudinal, all the way up the front of the spine to the occiput, and the posterior longitudinal ligament, all the way up to the front of the occiput, contain and suspend the vertebral column from above. This suspension system is dependent on a certain kind of levity and connectivity at the top, right? So very often in yoga, we might say things like lift through the skull, right? Lift through the skull. Well, there's nothing wrong with lifting through the skull. However, there is a more elegant and spacious way to find the lifting of the skull by following this ligamentous structure to the top and feeling the suspension of the heavenward drawing of ourselves, right? So up at the top of our spines, we have this this heavenward pull, and way down at the bottom, at the coccyx, we have this earthy draw, right? So what we begin to look at here is a suspension system of the spine, right? And this speaks very clearly to the yogic concepts of consciousness and earth, the elements of more density at the bottom, air and space, right? And then the consciousness and the connectivity to vastness or the unified field, however you look at the heavens, right? So let's see, ligaments, the curves of our spine, especially the lumbar and the cervical curves. Those are curves in our adult spines, and they've developed from use, right? We were initially fully C-curved around ourselves in our fetal, embryonic and fetal periods. And then as we came out on the land, especially if we played as babies down on our bellies a lot, we developed not just the lumbar curve that would bring us up off of the earth, but we developed front body support for this lumbar curve, right? And again, if we were lucky enough to have really full developmental movement, or if we later in our lives play with it, work with it, learn about it, and develop it, because it's always there to develop. If we have that, then we can keep a sense of freedom down into the earth with the coccyx. Yes, it relates to the earth. It tethers us to the earth, to tether the rising. But if we have, by any stretch of uh, kind of ongoing movement that contracts and limits the flow of prana, habitual patterns of holding. If we have any of those in our bodies, very often we'll want to play with and practice with them to free them up again so that we can feel for the energetic suspension system that our spines can be. All right, so this involves freeing the tail. It involves creating the individuation of the sections of our spine for their natural movement strengths. And it involves beginning to develop the real suspension system that this spine can be for us. All right. One of the things that we also want to look at is maintain, when we think of a suspension system and the continuity of the consciousness of our central nervous system and our brains contained within this structure. In terms of yoga, we want to develop a quality of a calm and mobile spine, not an agitated and all of this kind of thing that can develop in our lives, and then we bring it to our yoga. We want to look at the structure and say, well, yeah, I do. I would like to be calm at my center. And I would like to also have all of this capacity for movement and life and expression that my spine, the home of the central nervous system, and the sinewy containment of my body, right? All of this, I'd like to have this able to be very expressive, awake, and alive in life. So a calm and mobile spine is what we're looking at. And one of the ways that we can begin to look at the calming of our spine is to understand how each of these layers has its own movement strength, and each of these layers blends with the others so that the length of the spine can have a lot of range of movement. And to examine in our yoga postures how to keep the shearing forces out of the spine. So some of the ways that we can shear across our vertebral column, for example, is to push a part of the spine forward, lumbar spine pushing forward, to curl, not curl, but to tuck the pelvis in to harden it, sorry, not the pelvis, but the tail in to harden it into the pelvic floor, to attempt to do back bending by bringing it way too much into the thoracic region when the lumbar spine needs to fully support back bending, right? These are just some of the ways to try to, for example, twist too much in the lumbar spine. It's not good at twisting. Lumbar spine's good at flexion and extension, right? But it does that really well. And then in the thoracic, if we try to extend into a back bend too much, those spinal vertebrae are going to clamp down on one another. However, look at the lumbar as it bends back into a back bending situation. Do you see how much range of movement is there, right? We don't want to try to take a back bend into your upper back quite so much because these vertebrae will compress and because the back doesn't want to bend that much in the thoracic spine, it will shear across the thoracolumbar junction and create damaging compression and force on the disc. So we're looking for this continuity all the way through in all of our actions. And in our next section together, we're going to look at these aspects of spine and how they move, embodying their movements specifically, individually, and then coming into how we coordinate them into the movements of a soft, awake, alive, calm, and mobile vertebral center here. All right.